On the basis of the statement of intent, Solly Masimanga wrote a letter, this letter, of which we have copies here, I think, to state how we saw the statement of intent fairly being implemented in Gauteng. As I say, it was very easily and fairly implemented in KwaZulu-Natal, and this was Solly's letter on the 22nd of June explaining how we saw and understood the translation of the statement of intent into a government of provincial unity in Gauteng. So setting out the DA's approach to constituting a government of provincial unity, the DA provincial leader, Solly Masimanga, on my left, proposed an approach to implementing the statement of intent in the Gauteng context. He wrote the letter on the 22nd of June, 2024. He has received an acknowledgement of receipt by Mr. Ngeke, who he wrote it to, and Mr. Ngeke is the Gauteng Provincial Secretary of the ANC. But he has not received any kind of full reply. Now, Solly's letter refers to the crucial clauses in the statement of intent. And if there are two clauses you need to look at, my voice is going to give in because I've been very sick. Won't you just come a bit forward if you want to keep the sound going? There are two clauses in the statement of intent, and they were clause 16 and clause 19. Can I have some water, Ray? Yes. Clause 16 and clause 19. Those are crucial clauses in the statement of intent. Clause 16 defines the principles of proportionality, inclusiveness, and respecting the will of the voters in the outcome of the election. Those are three critical principles that underline the formation of a government. Now that makes sense because you want to respect the will of the voters, which means you have to respect the outcome of the election. We have a proportional representation system, so proportionality is a very important component of our entire electoral system. And then we also agreed that we should try and look at inclusiveness. Now, the other clause was clause 19, which defines the concept of sufficient consensus. Sufficient consensus is a uniquely South African concept that was coined at CODESA in those CODESA negotiations, and I'm old enough to have been at CODESA and here. And in CODESA, basically, there was the application of this concept called sufficient consensus, which we have defined for the very first time very clearly in the statement of intent. So the proportionality clause, which is clause 16, and the sufficient consensus clause, clause 19, were particularly important, and Solly referred to those clauses in his letter to Mr. Okay, I've got to just get it right here, sorry, to Mr. Ngeke of the ANC in the province. Now, up till now, the ANC has been prepared to offer the DA a maximum of 3 out of 10 cabinet seats. That is 3 out of 10 cabinet seats, without telling us how many seats they intended to take for themselves and how many they intended to give to other parties. Now, obviously, that's a completely unsatisfactory situation. In the election, the ANC was only slightly bigger than the DA. In the election, the ANC got 34% of the vote, and the DA got 28% of the vote. So we were literally 6 percentage points behind the ANC. We are almost the same size. And so as we go into a government of provincial unity, we needed to take each other into confidence. And it wasn't a situation in which the ANC would constitute a government and invite us in on their terms. It was a situation in which we would respect each other's proportion of the electoral result and agree on the composition of an executive. That was the basis on which it was done. The ANC said, right, we want to give you 3 out of 10 cabinet seats. We wanted to know, well, what do you plan to do with the rest? Because unless we know how many you're planning to take for yourself and whether you're planning to give any to other parties, that is crucially important information for us, and it's information that we need. That's obviously essential to building trust and to ensuring that we get clarity on the composition of government. Now, today in the discussions, it was very useful because the ANC conceded that they had intended to allocate 3 cabinet seats to the DA and keep 7 plus the Premier, that is 8, for themselves. Now, clearly, that would be a violation of the proportionality clause. It would not in any way be proportional, not even wildly. It would not reflect the will of the voters, and it would not reflect inclusiveness. So it was completely out of kilter with Clause 16 of the Statement of Intent. And we said, sorry, 8-3 is not acceptable. Today they did agree to go down from 7 plus the Premier to 6 plus the Premier, which would be 7 out of 11, and give 1 seat to the IFP and keep us at 3. Now, we have no problem at all with the IFP coming in. In fact, the IFP was an initial signatory to the Statement of Intent, and we believe they should be there in good faith. So we have no problem with that at all. But it is still wildly out of proportion to give the ANC 6 plus 1, the DA 3, which is less than half of what the ANC has got, although we're almost the same size electorally, and the IFP 1. So we said that is not helpful. It does not meet Clause 16, and it is not appropriate, and we cannot agree to that. So the ANC offered to reduce the 7 to 6, retain the DA at 3, and give the IFP or the PA, they said, 1. We welcome the IFP's possible inclusion, but point out that this is still far short of the requirements of Clause 16 of the National Statement of Intent. We, as the DA, are prepared to enter the government of provincial unity in Gauteng on the basis of a power-sharing partnership to reflect the will of the voters in Gauteng. But we are not prepared to be co-opted by the ANC on their terms alone, acting as if the ANC still has an overall majority in Gauteng, which it does not. We cannot agree to be taken hostage in a government of provincial unity in which only one party dictates the terms. As far as committee chairs in the Gauteng legislature are concerned, the proposal was that the DA would take 6 out of a total of 17, and we were prepared to accept this allocation despite a significant shortfall on the basis of the executive reflecting the letter and the spirit of the Declaration of Intent. Our door remains open to further negotiations when the ANC is genuinely committed to treating us as a party that is almost the same size as they are in Gauteng. We will again come to the table in an atmosphere of mutual respect and negotiate in good faith and seek to build trust between the parties. There is still work to do. We must work through the Statement of Intent to ensure that we have the same understanding of that statement and that we don't start arguing later about what various clauses mean. And we must reach an agreement for the genuine sharing of power so that we can properly serve the voters and act in the interests of the electorate and respect the way they voted. So that is our statement. It is going to be coming to you, and I would be very grateful if Janine could distribute. What is that, Janine?
That's the statement.
That's the statement. Okay, and if you could just bring me, I've run out of tissues for my cold, so sorry. Okay, well, here's one. Sorry, here's one. This is the one I lost at the beginning.
Solly, do you want to add anything?
No, I think we'll field in questions.
All right. Questions?
Oh, sorry, I've been very sick, so that's why I'm blowing my nose. Okay, was that clear? Was that clear to everybody? It's very technical, so I don't expect you to.
All right.
Please go ahead.
Tilo from Kaya 959 News. I just want to find out, you say that you guys are still
The government hasn't ground to a standstill. We have to reach an agreement. In most countries with coalitions, they take a very long time to negotiate a government. In some countries, 3 months, in others, 6 months, in others, up to a year, and in one case, up to 2 years, but we don't intend inflicting that on Gauteng. So I will clear my diary and do whatever it takes to get back into a room where people are prepared to negotiate in good faith and reflect the will of the voters and the agreement that we signed on the 14th of June. So that means we have to get a fair share of government, and we have to ensure that we are not treated as an add-on, but as a respected partner that the voters voted for in significant numbers.
Heidi?
Heidi Jacobs from ANC.
Oh, that's Heidi.
I just wanted to ask if this at all affects anything on a national level, seeing as though you haven't agreed on a provincial level. And then secondly, you keep mentioning that you are willing to get back into a room with the ANC to further negotiate. Did you get a sense that they are willing to further negotiate? And what would you do if the ANC forms a government in Gauteng with the other two political parties that they could form a government with?
Look, we remain open to engaging with the ANC. Whether there was a sense that this is the end of the road, certainly from our end, we don't take it that is the case. But if it is the end of the road on their side, then it will be the end of the road. We will take our opposition seat, and we'll see then what happens. How we engage going forward. If we're taking our opposition seat, is something that we will then communicate from a caucus perspective. We'll communicate with the media. There will be a full briefing on that, in due time. We are now giving everybody an update of where we are, and if the ANC sees the discussion to where we are as the end of the road, then obviously they will make that announcement, and they will then continue with government. And whether they're forming it with any other political party, we're still not clear what is the situation. We're only reporting on what has been said in relation to the conversations we were having with them.
National KZN impact.
KZN, yeah. So the conversation from a national perspective, is still intact. Or the pact, if you like, or the agreement remains, as is. But as Helen has said, there are certain clauses that needs to still be ironed out, and there has been a commitment to then iron out some of the clauses that are coming from the statement of intent. But be that as it may, I can tell you right now that as things stand at this point in time, there hasn't been any adjustments on a national or at the provincial level, and this is where we are at this point in time.
So just to make that clear, at this stage you can see Gauteng as a standalone in all of this. So the national and KZN deals or agreements are not dependent on Gauteng reaching an agreement. Further questions? Sir?
I just want to find out from Ms. Mando, what would be the representation in terms of numbers across the board, the collective or the communities that is satisfaction reflect as a fair representation? That's the first question. The second question is the DA, will the DA mind if other political parties besides the ANC join this? Of course, besides the if the EFF of the
Okay.
All right. So let me make it very, very clear that when we wrote to the ANC, initially, we said the DA is prepared to even go up to 3 positions, but with the spirit of allowing other political parties to come in. So it shouldn't be the DA gets this 3, the ANC gets the lot, and then everybody else gets to be kept on the side. We were saying let's deal with the proportionality. But given the fact that we were of the mind that you want to have inclusivity, we were prepared to then go. In fact, we said we'll go as low as 3, as long as on the other side, the ANC is also now willing to accommodate other parties. So you don't then say, I'm taking this as my own, and that's where it ends. And if there's anybody else to be accommodated, they will come from this, little share that is remaining. I think that goes against the spirit that Helen was talking to. So this is where we were. And we're still prepared to then engage with any other political party, as long as that political party, doesn't go against the constitution or the rule of law, or wanting to work in terms of advancing, the service delivery in terms of stopping corruption and ensuring that Gauteng in this instance works the way that it's supposed to work. So we're not closing any door to any political party, and certainly the DA just is asking to be consulted, as a partner, or potential partner in this case, to then say, if you are going to be introducing other political parties and you want them to be in cabinet, obviously then we need to then talking about the mechanisms of bringing that in. We also spoke about the possibility, because nobody has won elections. How do you then make decisions? And this is what we were trying to put on the table, to then say, what is the mechanism of decision making? And how do we then, not become rubber stamping, body within the cabinet, to make sure that there is robust engagement, and when there is disagreement, there's mechanisms put in place to how you deal with those disagreements. That's what we've been putting on the table. But, at this point, it's just been about the numbers and the position, to then say, you get 3, we get 7, and, we'll see whether we're introducing one, and if we're introducing one, it will be this one or that one. But it's not talking about, but what if there's more that is coming? What do you do then? So do you then just shove them on the side and say you just get committee chairs, or you bring them into the cabinet? Because for us, when you're talking about government of inclusivity, it talks about people that are decision makers. It's not people who are just doing an oversight role on the other side, but the people who are sitting in the room when budgets are decided. People who are sitting in the room talking about how departments are supposed to be performing. That's for us, when you start to talk about building an inclusive government. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case, in the talks that we've had so far. Helen?
Yes, thanks, Solly. If you look at the maths and you add the DA's 22 seats, 28% of the vote, to the ANC's 28 seats in Gauteng, which is 34% of the vote, you will see how close we are, and we could easily form a government just between us. And that would, if we worked out proportionately out of 10 cabinet seats, keeping the Premier on the side, it would mean that we would get 4.7, and the ANC would get the rest. Obviously, that includes the Premier. Now, we have not demanded 4.7 rounded up to 5. We've said we're quite happy to have 4. That would be a nice ceiling for us, and we're completely happy to have 4 out of 10, even though the ANC would have what we believed would be 5, because we always believed that the IFP would be included in good faith, because they helped us get a government of provincial unity in KwaZulu-Natal. And we're not fair weather friends in the DA. If they've done us a good service by sticking to the agreement in KwaZulu-Natal, we need to do the same in Gauteng. That's how we see it. So we believe that they should be there. So what we were proposing was 5 for the ANC, 4 for us, and 1 for the IFP, in relation to the proportionality clause, the inclusivity clause, and reflecting the will of the voters clause. That would have been fair. Not quibbling over numbers, but saying there's some principles that underlie the numbers that have to be respected. Right. The ANC said, no, we'll give you 3, but we're going to bring in other parties. We said, what other parties? Please tell us. That is in good faith. If you're establishing a government of provincial unity, we need to know, because we have some red lines. We actually do. And they wouldn't tell us, and today they said, no, well, actually the plan was to give you 3 and to take 7. So we could see that they'd been in bad faith, which was a huge problem for us. And then they said, okay, we can give now 1 to the IFP, but then you have to still keep 3, and we take 6. It doesn't work that way. There's got to be fairness. And it is very hard for the ANC to come to terms with losing power. I understand that. But they got 34%. They didn't get 50% plus 1. And that means that they can't dictate the terms. Yes, they are still the biggest party in the government of national unity, but we're not far behind them, and this has to be a power-sharing arrangement. This has to be an arrangement in which we respect each other. Now, Solly wrote on the 22nd of July to the ANC secretary in Gauteng and said, this is how we should do it. We should start with all of the positions. If you're looking at Speaker and Deputy, that makes it 13. Speaker and Deputy and Premier and 10 Cabinet Ministers. That makes it 13. On the basis of proportionality, you get 7, we get 6. We already agreed that the Speaker and the Premier would go to the ANC. That's a big concession, because really it should be 1 goes to the ANC and 1 goes to us. So we made a big concession to take it to the ANC and say, right, you can have the Premier and the Speaker, and we took the Deputy Speaker. Okay, so from those 13, the ANC's got 2, and we've got 1. And now we get to the Cabinet, and they're 10. We said, all right, let's take proportionately. Plus the Premier, you take 6, which is 5 cabinet seats plus the Premier, because he is part of the Cabinet, and we take 5. And then what we do is we each give up 1 to accommodate another party. So we want to bring in the IFP. The ANC gives us the first seat because it was proportional. Then we want to bring in another party. We give up 1 seat until it's inclusive. And Solly said that because the Cabinet is limited to 10, we couldn't bring in more than 3 other parties without completely undermining the proportionality aspect of it. That was the fair proposal. The ANC never intended, in fact, as we found out today, to bring in any other smaller parties. They were using that as a smokescreen to hide from us the fact that they wanted 7 and they wanted to give us 3. Now, really, we cannot have the wool pulled over our eyes in that way. And that is, for us, extreme bad faith and would actually justify us closing the door. But we know that 28% of Gauteng voters voted for us, and they expect us to make a very big effort to have a proportional share in government to serve all the people of Gauteng and to represent the will of the voters, which we will do. But it's got to be done on a fair and respectful basis, reflecting the agreement that we signed. We signed an agreement. We take it seriously. It is a commitment. It's like a contract, and it has to be respected. And we have to, where there is confusion about the clauses, as, for example, there seems to be about the clause on sufficient consensus, because the person from the ANC who explained it did not explain it in terms of the clause that exists there. So we are entirely happy to enter into good faith negotiations, but not to have the wool pulled over our eyes.
My question about the EFF.
No, look, we are prepared to go into any government of provincial unity or national unity with parties that respect and defend the Constitution, and the EFF's not one of those.
Thank you very much, provincial leader, Helen Zille Fires. How are you? Look, my name is Luma from the Mail and Guardian. Look, 2 questions. Are you, if you are saying you are not prepared, you are walking away from the negotiations with the Gauteng team, are you saying the Secretary General of the ANC must come in and try to resolve this? Is that something that you would consider doing instead of entirely walking away? Secondly, would you be prepared to just be an opposition? Because if you are saying the agreement of national and it was unilateral doesn't necessarily forces the ANC to govern with you,
would you then say, okay, because you don't want to include us the way that we want, then we walk away from this thing, you will cover whoever that you want to cover? And do you get a feeling that the ANC in Gauteng doesn't want to cover with the DA? Thank you very much.
Can I just say, it's not the way we want, it's the way the agreement says, okay? It's the way the statement of intent says. It's not the way we want. I just want to just clear up that point, Solly.
All right. So I think the first thing is to have an understanding of what we had put on the table in terms of the proportionality. And I must bring the public into confidence here and say the South African psyche is that push, get into something, and then 6 months down the line you get blamed for it. What would have happened if we now take this as is and we go into government? And anything that happens in cabinet, that doesn't really reflect what we are trying to then achieve. 6 months down the line, the public starts having an outcry about lack of service delivery and all of that. We're going to be blamed to say you are part of this government. And you forget that we now got into this with very limited say in what happens in that particular cabinet. So that is where we're coming from. That's the first thing. What are we prepared to then do? We haven't closed the door. Helen is still engaging with the national leadership. Part of the national leadership was there today. They were in this meeting. The SG was in this meeting, but left halfway because as well we have reached broadly, the principles, and the spirit was that we would have continued with it until we reached consensus. But unfortunately, that has broken. When it got to the point where we then said, if you're looking at the statement of intent, it doesn't really talk to what is actually being put on the table, and the interpretation thereof. It's something that still remains a little bit of a concern. Now, what are we prepared to then do? We're prepared to then go and say, if we are willing to look at this and also be able to then find, the middle ground where, the numbers are changed slightly, because then we need to then ensure that, there's not an over-representation, of the ANC in this particular cabinet. We agree that, they can have, a majority number, but it doesn't mean that you have to have 2 for 1, as an example. You have to then find a balance there, and this is what we are proposing. If the ANC is willing to meet us on that, in that regard, we're willing to then, get around the table. But should that not happen, we will gladly take, the opposition seats. We will gladly, engage with them on an ongoing basis, on an issue-by-issue basis. It doesn't necessarily mean that we will be, jumping at the first opportunity to pass a motion of no confidence. I don't think the DA operates in that particular manner. We want to then ensure that there is a government that works. We hope to be part of the government that works. But if it means that we will have to do it from an opposition perspective, we will gladly do that.
So just maybe to add on that. So here in Gauteng, you have clearly said, and the DA has clearly said, that they do not want to work with the EFF. If the ANC takes you to, or agrees to the terms that we are speaking about, does it then mean in the municipalities, that's what we are going to see? Because it would not make sense for the province, or for the provincial leadership to work together while municipalities or regional areas are not working together. Would it be something that you're willing to discuss, to say maybe let's take them out and work together everywhere in Gauteng? And also, just lastly, my understanding is that they offered you 2 seats, or you demanded 2 seats of education and health. And that was the agreement when you went to vote for the premium in the legislature. Is that the position?
No, I don't think when we went, and I don't know where that is coming from, when we went to engage with them initially, there was never even about portfolio allocation. It was about how do we deal with the issue of proportionality, because you have to agree on the numbers before you engage on the position. So we were not even at the position level as yet. So that's the first thing. The second part was that we were saying that let's deal with the province first. Let's deal with the issue of a national agreement. Once you have done that and the mechanisms are working, you can then say, remember, there is an intention to have call it the second CODESA, if you like, where, civil society and everybody else will be engaged, as had been said, to then say how these things are going to work going forward. Part of the engagement could be how do we make local government work a whole lot better than going forward. But at this point in time, we're not where we are discussing the issues of local government. It has been, how do we get the province going? How do we get a national government going? I think there's an issue of national government that has not been resolved. KZN has easily been resolved. Here in Gauteng, this is where we find ourselves.
Sorry, yes,
But I think from nature experience, it seems like it was a very frustrating day. What are some of the reasons that the ANC is giving as to why they aren't moving or they aren't willing to give up some of these positions?
Okay. Well, I'll surmise, I don't know for sure. Yesterday, the Premier, Panyaza Lesufi, was going to call a press conference to announce his cabinet. And he was probably going to say, this is what it is, and I'm leaving these 3 seats for the DA. Then Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General, intervened and said no. And I happened to be in Gauteng for another reason, and I stayed over, and I came here today. And Fikile Mbalula was there, and we did have this discussion. And then it emerged that the ANC was going to announce 7 ANC people and 8 ANC people. That's Panyaza plus the 7. 8 and leave 3 for us, which was what we suspected, but it was confirmed today. Now, why is the ANC sticking on 8? Apart from the fact that I don't think they fully realize that the voters want power sharing. They don't want us to be co-opted. They want us to share power. They don't want us to become hostages of the ANC. They want us to be genuinely in power, not just in office. The second thing is that the ANC is very, very divided in Gauteng. And they need to put together an executive that takes account of all the various factions and put them together. That is my surmise. And that is why they need to have enough places to satisfy enough people. We're having a similar challenge currently in Parliament, and I'm not here to talk about Parliament, but we also need a fair allocation of various house chairs and other things in terms of the statement of intent. We cannot be rolled back on everything as if we are some kind of useful crutch to keep the ANC in power. We're a party in our own right with a mandate from the voters that intends to execute that mandate in a power-sharing arrangement. And that is our commitment to the residents of Gauteng, who voted for us in very large numbers, and we will fulfill that commitment, and we won't allow the wool to be pulled over our eyes.
Heidi, and then I'm going to the server back.
It's Heidi Jockus from ANC again. I just want to ask in terms of what point does the DA walk away? Is there a condition? I mean, I asked this question to the PA on Sunday, and they said if we don't get a post provincially or nationally, we're out. Is the DA thinking about that here in Gauteng? If you don't get what you ask for, will you eventually walk away? Because, I mean, the talks with the ANC, they are sticking to what they are offering and what's on the table. And sorry, I asked you this morning, and you said you don't want to get into it, but I'm going to ask you again. What did you ask for? You said you don't want to speak about the portfolios, but are you able to tell us which portfolios you actually asked for?
Okay.
You want to Sol, you go first.
All right. So I think Helen will talk about the walking away part. Let me respond to what we were proposing, because in the negotiations you don't stamp your authority. You propose, there's a counter proposal, and you take it from there. What we said is that we're looking at the Department of Infrastructure Development, DID. Ideally, we would have loved to incorporate that with COCTA for a number of reasons. You're looking at municipalities that are falling apart. You're looking at infrastructure that is falling apart. Therefore, you want to then start coordinating the working of the infrastructure from a provincial perspective, but working with municipalities. That's why you would want that. And this is what we thought that would be able to then bring in some impact in that regard. We said we would look at education or health, not both, that one or that one. And we said then the other one which we would look at was economic development, or no, transport. We were looking at the transport, And then we were also now looking at economic development, which would have also included agriculture as well, as alternatives to that. So we didn't come and say, you give us this position or we walk away. We said these are the proposals that we would want to then put on the table.
What did the ANC offer you? Did they tell you which positions?
We were not there yet.
So they didn't say transport?
We were just told, give us 3 names and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, and you see, that's the problem, if I may say. Heidi, you've used terms like, what did you want and what did they offer? And that displays the imbalance in those discussions. Because we're working in terms of this agreement. And this states very carefully and clearly what is our right. It's not that we come as supplicants with a begging bowl. We are trying to implement an agreement signed by ourselves and by the ANC. And we take it seriously. We genuinely do. Because you can't establish governments in good faith unless these agreements are taken seriously. It's like having an anti-nuptial contract and everybody just ignores it afterwards. You can't do that. I've been in many governments before. I've taken over many governments from the ANC, actually. And I now run the DA's governance unit, which manages a lot of coalitions across the country. And if these documents aren't worth the paper they are written on, then the government that emerges from it is on rocky ground and has no foundation. So we expect the agreement to be implemented, which I think is absolutely rational and fair. And not only is it rational and fair, it is a prerequisite for the government to work. So we are saying clause 16, proportionality, reflects the outcome of the election, and inclusivity is important for us. It's not a question of how much will the ANC give us and what are we demanding. We do it on the basis of a document. And we expect them to be fair with us and help us build trust. Not say, oh, we'll decide on the other parties and we'll negotiate with the other parties. Meanwhile, today they admitted they wanted all of the 7+1 for themselves. That's not conducive to building trust, because we would have ended up with 3 in a cabinet of 11, and they would have had the rest of the 8, having fobbed us off, saying all the time, we're bringing in the smaller parties, but never taking us into their confidence as to which ones they were. So we're saying we're at the table. If you're not prepared to live by these documents, we will go into opposition. And we don't mind being in opposition. It is our comfort zone. And it's not a threat. It's just a fact. And facts aren't threats. No threats here, just a fact that we will go into opposition if the agreements that we signed are not honoured, which is a totally rational position to take. And we know that the next election is 2 years away from now, which is round the corner, and we'll see what happens there.
I just want to make one thing clear. We did not walk away. There were an offer from the ANC. We made a counter offer. They were unwilling to accept our counter offer, and that ended the negotiations there. So I'm coming to you, and then I'm coming to the gent over here.
Thank you. Shannon Merricks from KZN Broadcasting Africa. We put the same question to the ANC about the document. As you call it a prenup, we call it a love letter. It's like a Labola negotiation. You agree, those are the terms, those are the clauses, those are the paragraphs, and we didn't get any answers last night on the same point. Now that you're sitting where you are sitting, in your love letter, you say Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, national is one package. What do you do if Gauteng collapses? Because it's about to collapse. It's 9/11. It's going to collapse.
Let me say that we agreed that we wouldn't conclude the Gauteng negotiations until we'd concluded the national negotiations, but they stand separately. So we aren't, and I'll be quite honest, I mean, we could threaten to bring KwaZulu-Natal down, if they don't agree to the document's terms in Gauteng, but we're not going to do that. We're not irresponsible people. We don't want to hand KwaZulu-Natal to Ngeke and the EFF. It would be a total disaster for that province. So we're not about to do that. There are other levers that we're going to use. Obviously there are. But we're not going to say the people of KwaZulu-Natal can be thrown to the dogs. Not at all. And we are also going to say that unless we have a respectful settlement in Gauteng, we're not going to sit and do negotiations around the reconstitution of all the metros like Ekurhuleni and like Johannesburg and like Mogale City. Because we have to build a basis of trust with the ANC. And they must tell us the truth, because we have to be partners in a government of provincial unity. It is not a situation in which they tell us what to do and we meekly accept it.
Sir?
I'm speaking from the SEC. I would like to know, because you've managed to reach an agreement with the other province. So in Gauteng, is the ANC aligned with the DA only disagreeing about the proportionality or that's not?
I think the disagreement here is where you started, because that's the base. So you're not at the space where you're talking portfolios and positions. It's at what is proportional representation. So I think that's where we got stuck. In KZN, by the way, the ANC proposed that they use proportionality. The IFP was a little bit uncomfortable with it. We persuaded the IFP to go with it. And this is why it was then dealt with so speedily that they're able to then find each other and they're able to then form government. The same principle was actually even reached at the national level. This is why you ended up having this. So for us, then it becomes a stumbling block, if you like. If what has been done in KZN and proposed by the ANC, what is done at a national level, proposed by the ANC, becomes stuck when it comes to Gauteng. And this is why we're not able to then get to the next step, because we're still stuck on the first step, and that is how do we then deal with the issue of proportionality. Perhaps in KZN it was the easiest thing because they felt they didn't have the big number, so they needed to push as much as they possibly can to get to the satisfactory MEC number that they would want to then get to. Be that as it may, it's okay. But it was the principle that we agreed to. At a national level, it was the principle that we agreed to. Here, it becomes a problem where we are told proportionality, doesn't mean much. But how do I go and say to the voters that have given us 28% that you have to settle for 2 positions in the cabinet, while the second biggest party is only bringing in 34%, while there's only a 6% difference between us. But if you're looking at the allocation of seats, then there's a vast difference in that. Then we will be sitting in a corner where all that we'll be doing is to rubber stamp what the ANC is actually then saying to us. And unfortunately, as a Democratic Alliance, we're really not prepared to do that. We made a promise to the people of Gauteng that we will bring some kind of difference and to rescue and to make sure that government works for them. And therefore, if we are going to do that, and the mandate from the residents is that go form part of government and have a voice in that, therefore we need to then find each other in that. And this is what we've explained to the ANC. And we said respectfully, are we able to then find each other? Respectfully, are we able to then take the spirit of what the voters have said? So if you take the spirit of what the voters have said, you can't say I'm taking 80% of the power, I'm giving you 20%. And then we will not even have mechanism in terms of, when there's disputes, how do we then deal with those disputes? Because then all I'm coming to do is to then rubber stamp your decision. Then, for me, then it would have been a waste of the 28% that we got from the people of Gauteng.
And remember, the 28% is 45% of the combined DA and ANC total. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Okay. I'll go 2 more questions. Sir, we go first.
Good afternoon. Alpha Mushan here from IFP. In the legislature, President Check was appointed or elected deputy speaker.
We are going to have a caucus conversation in terms of what happens with the position that is currently there. And then obviously we'll release a statement on that once we've had a caucus engagement. You would appreciate we're coming straight from that particular meeting into this particular one. We haven't had an opportunity to then go into details of what are the ramifications for the decisions if it's going to go the way that it's going to go. So we're not at the end as yet. So you can't make a decision as if you are at the end. Until and at such time as the ANC says we are at the end, then we'll take it that we're at the end, then we'll make a decision on that. Going back on the issue of yes, being characterized. Look, if there's one thing that we'll never do is to stoop to low levels of name calling. I don't think that is good. I think that is very much embarrassing. We're not going to do that. But I'll give you the facts. You are called into a meeting to then say, come, let's engage and negotiate. You go into a meeting, you put your proposal in writing. You are given a proposal on the fly. Somebody sitting there and says, I think I can give you one. And in that meeting we say, please don't talk about giving us something, because we're not coming here as if, we're sitting with a begging bowl, as Helen has said. We're coming here to engage in all honesty and in a professional manner, that we're putting everything that we're saying on the paper and we're saying, let's discuss this. You continue to then say, well, I'll up my offer by 2, just like that. And then when we then put something to you back in writing, you then say, okay, let me go and engage my executive committee and then I'll come and talk to you. We agreed that, okay, this is what is going to happen. A proposal that has been put on the table is going to be discussed. And there will be a follow-up meeting by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That is yesterday, by the way. By yesterday, 4 o'clock, nothing came true. We never got a call. We never got a love letter, as the gentleman is calling them. And by 5:30, do we get a media statement that's saying there's going to be an announcement at 7 o'clock? Now you tell me, A, who's negotiating in bad faith, but B, who's behaving like a bully? Because a bully says, well, come kicking or screaming or, go to hell. That's somebody who's negotiating in bad faith. We don't do that. We came, we put everything that, we needed to put in writing on the table. And as part of the negotiations, you then say, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that. And then you then engage and behave, accordingly. But we're not going to stoop to levels of name calling. We're not going to stoop to levels of characterizing people as spoiled brats and all of that. We are serious about running government, and I think it will also reflect in how we behave ourselves here and how we engage in the conversations as well. If somebody wants to then behave in a manner that represent what happens somewhere else, not in a serious setup, then it is for them to then answer, not for us.
May I just add to that? Arrogant has become the ANC's favorite word. If you don't agree with them, you are by definition arrogant, because no one's allowed to disagree. When we request and require that signed agreements be respected and implemented, then suddenly we're arrogant. Asking people to respect documents that have been signed and agreed to through a process is not arrogant. It's the way the world functions in a predictable and orderly way. And all we are asking for is agreements to be respected and to be treated as partners and not as supplicants. We understand that the ANC is slightly bigger than we are in Gauteng. It's the third biggest party in KwaZulu-Natal, but it is the biggest party still in Gauteng. And we respect that, and we will recognize that in implementing the agreement. But equally, we expect to be recognized as the second biggest party, not far behind. And we need a respectful interchange. We don't go to the media and say things about the ANC as, for example, they said about us last night. We come in a respectful tone, referring to the documentation that's been signed, referring to the expectations that are legitimate of our voters, and looking forward to ensure that when we're in government, we are not just in office, but that we have some power in proportion to the votes we bring to the government of provincial unity. That is not arrogant. That is decent and respectful, and in fact expected by the negotiated settlement.
Last one? No, that gentleman is going to have the last one.
Basically, the question about do you feel as the DA that negotiating with the provincial leadership of the African National Congress is not getting you anywhere, and you would like the leadership of the party to intervene and to negotiate with them rather than the provincial leadership? And the other one was, do you have a feeling that the Premier does not want to work with the DA? Thank you very much.
Well, I'll gladly answer that. You just need to go back to the elections, the ANC's own elections 2 years ago, and realize that the people that is the chairperson and somebody who was contesting them are actually still in a power tussle as things are. And therefore now you have people that are still trying to then ensure that they are able to then feed their own, call it their own factions, if you like. But also there's another element. If you read at the ANC's own, and I don't want to be speaking on behalf of the ANC here, but they find themselves between a rock and a hard place. In that, if you have a premier that is a man, then you need to have more representation of women in the cabinet. And if they don't have enough position to satisfy that, remember in Gauteng they have 5 regions that they need to satisfy. They have additional SACP that they have to accommodate. They have COSATU somehow that they have to then accommodate in that. So not only do they have to deal with the 5 regions, they have to deal with the factions, they have to deal with the SACP, they have to deal with COSATU. So they must then answer that, to then say how much of this is a factor in terms of the decision and that they're taking and how they're not willing to then move. I mean, if the DA was willing to move up to 3, when you're looking at proportionality, what is given on the other side? That's the question that should be asked, but we're not getting there yet. I think that was, whether, we do believe that there is a bit of political or internal political game or internal political ambitions that have been answered to, yes. So this is what is actually then happening, or well, according to my own understanding and of what is the lay of the land there. And whether that means that, getting somebody like Fikile or the national guys to then come in and deal with the situation. They went and dealt with the Northwest. Because Northwest, with its own, and as much as they were on their own, forming government, they couldn't agree on how, the portfolios are to be allocated and who's going to be in the cabinet and all of that. The Thuli House had to intervene because of the factions that were taking place there. So I think if there was and I'm not saying the ANC at a provincial, at a national level are not talking to each other. That is not for me to then, respond to. But I'm saying to you that if you were to then have people that are removed from what is happening here, you possibly could have a different, answer to what is actually brought us here today.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I think my question is directed to Helen. I want to play devil's advocate. As the DA, you run Western Cape, economic hub. In KZN, economic hub, you got some few nice seats there. In Gauteng, 3 seats will put DA into the top 3 economic hubs in South Africa. So 2030, as the FedEx, you'll be happy, you'll smile. So that's the one side of the coin. The other side is for the ANC now. They've lost their 39%. So if they can keep Gauteng by hook or crook, I'm playing devil's advocate, they maintain one economic hub, which is basically Gauteng. So don't you think for them, even on the metros, because they already have agreement with other parties, for them, this is not about Misupi. This is about the ANC as an entirety. To blame one person in a structure is neither here nor there. But don't you think they have much to lose to give you those 3 seats, MECs, irrespective whether it's sanitation, whether it's whatever. But then you're in charge of 3 economic hubs in the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Lesotho isn't a problem. You know, we're not blaming anybody. We're not blaming anybody. And let me just clarify one thing. This is not about carving up South Africa and saying one for you and one for you. This is about saying, what did the election result tell us? This is about the choice of the voters. If the voters don't vote for the ANC, we can't say, oh, well, we feel sorry for you, let's give you 1 economic hub. Because democracy works in that the voters choose. And if the voters don't give you 50% plus 1, the voters are telling you that you've got to make a plan with other parties. And especially when 2 parties are almost exactly the same size, as they are very closely in Gauteng, then it's not for us to say, well, it's fair to give the ANC 1 economic hub. No, the only thing that is fair in a democracy is to reflect the will of the voters. We've got an overall majority in Gauteng, in Western Cape, because the voters said that. The majority happen to like the way the DA governs there, and we get an overall majority there. In KwaZulu-Natal, we're the 3rd biggest party, and we respect that. And as Solly said earlier, the IFP wanted to take more seats, and we said, no, you can't. You've got to give the ANC their fair share, and we've got to give the least. We've got 2. That's fair because of our proportion in the electorate. But we can't merely get 3 or even 2 or even 1 here when we've got more than double in Gauteng what we've got in KwaZulu-Natal. So the question is not what's fair or unfair in a general theoretical sense of like handing out sweets to a group of children, if I can say that. What is fair is how do we reflect the will of the voters?